back again. So we're at the point now where we are going to glue the fretboard onto the neck. Remember, we've routed the truss rod channel. We've installed the gaps at the base of the heel for the spoke to sit in. So yeah, we're ready to glue the fretboard on, and I'll show you how to do that. The other thing we've got to do is to stabilise the truss rod within the channel. As you know, wood vibrating is all part of the fun, all part of what we're trying to achieve with the creation of sound. And as such, as the wood vibrates, various tones and frequencies will cause different vibrations. And because we have a metal rod inside the truss rod, we're going to stabilise it using a little bit of mastic. Yeah, I suppose you call it mastic. Yeah, some silicone sealant, just a couple of little drips of silicone in the channel itself, just to stop the truss rod from vibrating should the sound source create the right harmonics to make that happen. The other thing we're going to do is drill the holes for the machine heads, for the tuners. We'll get that done now as well before we look at gluing the fretboard on and carving the drop away into the headstock. Just because it's nice and square at the moment, and that's going to make life easier. We start putting that in the way, or doing any form of other carving, and it might make things a little difficult. So we'll do that first. Right then, truss rod channel. Make sure there's no dust in there, don't trust dust, and a little bit of sealant, just a tiny little blob in 2 or 3 places. And that literally will do it. You don't want to fill it up because for obvious reasons it'll end up splurging everywhere and getting in the way, and this should be enough to, as I say, the idea is not to use it as glue, it's literally just to stop it from vibrating, so you don't want to alter the functionality of it. That will be suficiente. Pardon my Spanish. Groovy. I love this smell. This stuff smells of salt and vinegar. Reminds me of fish and chips. Right then, let's get these machine head holes put in. So I've got my template, I've offered it up, I've got my bradle through the holes there, I've marked the centre of each of the holes for the machine heads, and just as a double check, I've just lined a rule between the 2 last points of the brad points that I've made, and made sure that each one of those points is on the same line, which it is. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drill through firstly with a pilot drill, just a nice slim drill, so that when it goes through, if it does tear out at the back, then it won't be too dramatic, and we can sort that out with the larger drill to size. Lovely, so that's drilled the 6 pilot holes in the headstock. So what we need to do now is to make those pilot holes big enough to receive the shaft of the machine head. This beautiful Spurzor locking machine head has a ferrule that will sit through the front face of the headstock, and a little locating pin on the back which negates the requirement to have screws to hold them in place. That's what will stop it from rocking about once it's situated. So we're going to measure the width of the string ferrule, and I read that to be 9.7 millimeters. So I'm going to go for a 10 mil hole. It doesn't actually matter if they're a tiny little bit of play when they go in. When it's all tightened down and that one is locked in with that pin, that should hold everything beautifully in place. So I'm going to go for a 10 mil hole for each of those. Now what I do is I use one of these step drills. So this drill's got cutting faces which are graduated on this particular one from 4 to 12 millimeters, and I'm going to allow the drill to cut down into the headstock until I achieve the 10 millimeter diameter in the front, and then I'm going to flip the headstock over, and I'm going to do the same from the back. And the reason that I do that is to prevent tear out, because obviously if you're banging a 10 mil drill bit straight through there, there's a reasonable chance that you'll knock a great big lump out of the back side of it. So this is a safer way of doing it. You don't have to use a step drill. You can obviously just do it with a 10mm drill bit, but I find this a little bit safer practice, so that's what I do. So let's have a crack at getting that sorted. Right, so I'm looking at my step drill and I can see that the 10mm mark would leave me with 2 steps showing. So as long as I take this nicely down so that only 2 steps remain, I'll know I'm at the 10mm mark. Obviously when it's spinning round you cannot see the that's better. You can't see the number 10, so be mindful of it and make sure that you know how far to go. There's nothing worse than overdoing it. So let's get it centered. Now the great thing about these step drills is that they kind of self-stabilizing. It's a brilliant bit of kit. Fingers out of the way as much as you possibly can, but again, work holding, absolutely key. And take it nice and slow. Right then, next thing to do is to actually glue the fretboard to the top of the neck, which is quite a monumentous point in the build. So what we're going to look at now is how to achieve that, and more importantly how to make sure that when we apply the glue that the fretboard stays in the right place, because as with all lubricating factors, as glue is until such time as it hardens, all lubricating factors between 2 flat surfaces, there is a tendency for it to slide about. If you can imagine 2 bits of glass with water between them, they slip over each other. So we've got to try and do, especially when you're putting clamping pressure on, the tendency is for it to slip. So we're going to look to anchor the fretboard in place so that when we glue it, we know that it stays all in the right location. And the way we're going to do that is I will get this tiny little drill bit here, and I'm going to drill a hole straight through the slot of the fret, straight into the fret slot, one at that point and one randomly somewhere a little bit down this point. Once I've achieved that, I'm going to get some of these little veneer pins, and we're going to literally offer the fretboard up to the top of the guitar neck and pop the veneer pins in the holes that we've made, and then just tap them so that they make contact with the wood beneath. And we will actually glue the neck in place with those pins in situ, and with just enough sticking out that when the glue's cured, we can just pull them back out again, clean up the fret slot, and we should be good to go. I do like to do that with a hand drill, incidentally, as you noticed. The main reason is that that drill bit is so fine that I get better control with a hand drill rather than trying to do it with the electric. I have had them snap off, and then yeah, you're in a world of pain because you've got to try and get them out without disturbing the fret slot. So that drill bit was, in fairness, not a great deal wider, a little bit wider than the actual slot itself, but the hole that it's made will be covered by the crown of the fret once it gets fretted, so I'm not worried about that. Right, so pins in, time to make a commitment to this. So we know that the fretboard has been tapered to the same dimensions as the neck because we used the same template. But again, always just a really good idea. Measure, measure, cut. So I'm being very, very mindful that everything lines up by feel, by eye, by line, and paying particular attention to the nut to make sure I've made marks on the side here where the nut slot sits, and to make sure that the nut slot on the fretboard lines up with those 2 points. If you get that out of whack, if that's on skew, then it will mess up your intonation later on in the game. So I'm happy with that now, and literally all I'm going to do The little pins are in places. Okay, and again double check we're all good before we commit. It's all good. It is. Right. Again, double check. Lovely, that's located, so let's get it glued in. One more bit of pre-gluing prep that we've got to do is this. We're going to be putting glue all over this this surface here. We're going to be clamping down, and as with all gluing processes, the act of the clamping causes some squeeze out, which causes the glue to move obviously into the open spaces outside of the neck and potentially also into the truss rod channel. So we are going to cover the truss rod channel in masking tape like so. And I will just get my scalpel, whatever I've got to hand this straight, which just happens to be the fretboard for the next guitar, and just trim that off. Like that. So now what we're going to do is when we put the glue on, we'll get the glue on, and then literally just before we roll it up, just before we clamp it down, we'll pull the masking tape off, and that will leave just a little channel of space that hasn't got glue on, which will allow for a little bit of seepage. Truth be told, in my experience, the likelihood of glue entering that channel and interfering with the mechanism of the truss rod is very, very slim. It's never happened to me, and back in the day before I was au fait with this technique, I just poured glue on there and clamped it down and never had any problem, truth be told. But again, belt and braces, best practice, so that's what we've done. Right then, our clamping we will go. Nice bead of tight bond. As with all things, always better have a little bit too much than a bit too little. Make sure you get it spread all the way over every surface. Don't leave anything dry. You run the risk of having a gap. Now, as we put the masking tape down the middle of it, we don't have to worry about getting it too close to the channel. We can just literally splurge it all over. And this is my clamping table, my clamping zone. And the great thing about this is it's melamine. I think that's the term that you use, effectively kitchen worktop. And kitchen worktop and tight bond don't get on very well, which is great news, because anything that drips out of the seams that we make can very easily be cleaned up with a sharp edge. You can get an old chisel that you don't use for anything too funky and just scrape it off, and it comes off and is nice and flat again. So I use this as the kind of cantilever to the clamping, if you like, to literally just clamp the neck down to the bench, and it gives me a nice flat surface from the point of view of underside. Okay, that's plenty too much glue. And now, as promised, lift the masking tape off. We know we've got a nice channel. And we've got our fretboard. We know we've got our locating pins ready to go. That one's in. I'm just going to give that one a tiny little tap, because there's a very slight curve on this board, which obviously will be pulled out once it's there we go. Lovely. Wonderful. So that's obviously not designed to be clamping the fretboard in any way. It's literally just stopping the lateral movement. I've just noticed a tiny little bit of glue has gotten down into the back by the spoke, so let's take the time to wipe that off. I don't want that going hard. Already there's some squeeze out appearing on the sides there. We haven't even clamped it. So wonderful stuff. Okay, clamping culls. These are just radiusing blocks, and because they have a radius to them, they will tend to press on the two sides of the fretboard, which has got to be good. And it's very quickly going to get one top and bottom. I'm not putting all the pressure of the world on these at the moment. We'll take them down at a similar kind of rate. I can move that a little bit closer to the edge. Super duper. Again, just making contact at the moment. No real pressure. Right, let's get the big guns out. Oh, I wish I had some more clamps. So I'm trying to get the clamp directly over the middle of the fretboard in the middle of the clamping cull. That'll obviously give me a good uniform pressure. Right then, so now they're all on, we can start to give it a bit of welly. Good, and what we're looking for is squeeze out the whole way along. I'll try and get another one in there. Yeah, we got it. Wonderful. So we've got glue coming out of every possible area. And as with always, if you have the opportunity to clear up glue, then do. Most of this I'm not going to be able to get into, but if you can, get it while it's wet. Otherwise it starts to become a chore. It becomes a job of work rather than a tiny little tidy up. Super duper. We shall leave that to cure, technically for a couple of hours, although in reality overnight, and we'll get on with something else.